So, we are finally here, my friends. We are in the People's Crusade, which, obviously we're familiar with this telling from Extra History, which was a complete, it was a complete mess, but in a weird way may have actually been a good thing in the long run, at least in terms of distracting the more eastward adversaries, because they didn't take the Crusade seriously after the mess that was the Peoples, which may have helped the actual Crusaders establish themselves more in the East. I don't know. I've heard that in a weird way, the People's Crusade was actually good in the long run and actually helped despite what actually happens during it. So again, I know that Extra History's telling was a bit more funny. Kings and Generals likes to play things more straight, whatnot, but I'm wondering if even he can try to negate the People's Crusade. I don't know, I'm really looking forward to this, so yeah, without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we?
While Urban was still touring central and southern France, a man by the name of Peter the Hermit, inspired by the Pope, decided to launch his own campaign, carrying his own message and delivering it to a different target audience. Starting out in Berry, Peter began touring the urban centers of northern France, and
everyone's having their own tours. They're going on tour, guys, and now he's like, let me do it.
Before long, he captivated the hearts and minds of thousands of people. One of his supporters described him by writing, "Outdoors he wore a woolen tunic, which revealed his ankles, and above it a hood. He wore a cloak to cover his upper body and a bit of his arms, but his feet were bare. He drank wine and ate fish, but scarcely ever ate bread." Another eyewitness reports, "We saw him wander through cities and towns, spreading his teaching, surrounded by so many people, given so many gifts, and acclaimed for such great piety that I don't ever remember anyone equally honored. Whatever he did or said seemed like something almost divine. Even the hairs of his mule were torn out as though they were relics." Peter was an extremely charismatic preacher.
Incredibly so. He has what the kids call aura, and just a lot of charisma, and you could see how influential his charisma is by what he manages to get started. But again,
who told the story of how he visited Jerusalem a few years earlier and saw firsthand how the Muslims were mistreating the Christians and desecrating the holy sites. According to him, as he slept in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, he received a vision of Christ, who handed him a round letter that instructed all Christendom from all parts of the world to take up arms and journey to Jerusalem to fight against the pagans and to claim eternal possession of the city with all its pertinent lands. There is no evidence that Peter ever made such a journey, but that didn't stop thousands from joining him as he travelled from one city to the next, warning that the last days were at hand, and that the Christians would have to travel to Jerusalem to battle the Antichrist. Compared to Urban's more moderate approach
Yeah, he's going full on with it, right? Urban's trying to be more controlled, trying to play it more yeah, we need to crusade, but kind of more organized, mainly the kings, the knights, let them handle it, the average people, if they want to go, need permission, you know what I mean? There's a sense of, restraint with Urban. There's a sense of logic there, right? He's working with Alexios, and he wants a control thing. Peter is just stirring it up. He's poking the bear. He's like, get up, let's go for it. Yeah, crusade. Kind of what we think more of a crusade in a sense like that, the spirit, right? But without any real restraint or control. So yeah.
The warrior class, Peter appealed to a larger group of people, mostly commoners, at a particularly sensitive moment in time. 1095 saw the occurrence of a meteor shower, an aurora borealis, a lunar eclipse, the passage of a comet, blood-colored clouds, and a number of fascinating stories. Some said that the Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne had come back from the dead, ready to lead his people into Jerusalem. When word of the Crusade began to spread, people began disfiguring and tattooing themselves, claiming miracles and divine signs. But arguably the largest contributor to the widespread frenzy was the ongoing series of plagues. If we take a look at the multiple and independent writers during this period, a trend starts to show. During the period between 1092 and 1095, there are over 40 mentions of plague, peaking in 1094 with 25 reported plagues, often accompanied by famine. Surrounded by Catholic imagery of damnation in the form of frescoes and grotesque sculptures, the notion of abandoning the little they had to journey to the land of milk and honey, that is how many Christians thought of the Holy Land, suddenly seemed like a great idea. Contrary to popular belief, the so-called People's
I'm telling you, like, it's almost like amazing just the amount of things that took place to help people like push, like the plagues, the astro, signs, the astronomical, I don't think that's the word, but point is the signs of the comets and the sky, like everything looks like this is it, right? Like you can see why like less learned, people, especially like in the medieval times, he mentioned they're more illiterate, so they kind of did just listen to these holy people talk and whatnot. You could see how this could just all works perfectly to create this storm. It's kind of amazing.
Crusade had a large portion of nobles who joined Peter's group, and those nobles would be the ones who were in charge of the crusade and were about to unleash chaos on Germany. Still, it is important to mention that although there were some members of this movement who embarked on the journey for materialistic reasons, this was very much the exception rather than the norm. After passing through Champagne in March 1096, Peter moved into Lorraine before spending Easter in Cologne. He sent smaller parties to preach in the surrounding cities, while assembling a force of 15,000 men, women and children. Peter was joined by many minor nobles, among them Walter Sans-Souvois, Renaud of Bray, Geoffrey of Burel, and many others.
He is mistakenly known as Walter the Penniless due to crude translation of his family name, which actually means fearless. Oh, that sucks.
The plan was to take the route towards Jerusalem, one which the local German populace was very aware of since the Great German Pilgrimage of 1064. This pilgrimage was led by a number of major German clerics, among them Archbishop Siegfried of Mainz, and although possibly thousands of pilgrims were killed by local Bedouins in Caesarea, most of them reached Jerusalem and returned home by sea. However, this was another big deviation from Urban's route and timing, which intended for the crusade to cross the Adriatic and land in Dyrrhachium on August 15, 1096, coinciding with the Byzantine harvest, a date Alexios Komnenos knew ahead of time and prepared for by sending vast amounts of grain merchants and Latin translators to the region. Peter took the time to preach in Cologne to recruit more German lords, but Walter was impatient and decided to leave as soon as the feast was over with a few thousand companions. As a result of this schism, the crusade was now divided into 5 groups, one under Peter, one commanded by Walter, and 3 more under the leadership of nobles, who distorted the words of the initial call even further and weaponized them against the thriving Jewish community. The series of events which we now call the Rhineland massacres would become a turning point in history. This was not the first time when a minority was attacked by the majority, but the scale and nature of these attacks would mark a new chapter and set a precedent which would recur numerous times in the centuries to come. Contemporary scholars writing after the conquest of Jerusalem tried their best to put the blame on Peter or peasant greed, with the goal of distancing the more successful Prince's Crusade from the failed People's Crusade, but not because of the mass slaughter of the Jews, which the Church unilaterally saw as a grave sin, but because after many of them were forcibly baptized, they reconverted once the storm had passed. But how did this all start, and why did these three groups begin the rampage in the first place? Even before the army crossed the Rhine, word spread proclaiming, "Do we need to travel to distant lands in the east to attack the enemies of God, when there are Jews right before our eyes, a race that is the greatest enemy of God? We've got it all backwards." Days went by.
My goodness, just like the way people just take what was the original call to go to Jerusalem and then just morph it for their own like other purposes, whether that be like, you know, greed or whatnot. It's just astounding, and it's like really, this is awful, by the way. Like what happens, a complete mess as everything just falls apart.
As children asked their parents if this was Jerusalem at the site of each new city, and the growing excitement turned into—
You know what's funny? I'm telling you, just aside, like, the Princess Crusade was meant to assemble the fighting class, and that makes sense. You're going to go fight enemies, right? In foreign lands. Like, you need warriors, you need commanders, you need people with experience. Imagine assembling children. Like, that's why Pope Urban didn't want this. Obviously, children are going to be useful in fighting. Or like, you know, usually women either, because war is mainly a man's thing, you know what I mean? Especially back then. There's a reason men went to fight, you know? And so, like, just a mob. You're just attacking cities with children. Just the funniest things. Assembling them, like, oh my god. Oh my god. Dude, I broke. I need to take a break. Oh god. I'm still laughing. Okay. I'm just saying, like, it's insanity. And they don't know what they're doing. There's no strategy or tactics, and they even completely lost the point. They're just let's jump and kill Jews now. Like, oh man, it gives energy like the Fourth Crusade when they're like, all right, we're going to Jerusalem. Nah, instead we're just gonna attack the Romans. Like, let's just take Constantinople and make our own empires. Like, oh my gosh. Oh my god, I love this. I'm telling you, the First Crusade just... Let's keep going. I don't love the slaughter, by the way. I just want to preference that. I don't like the way that they just decided to start killing the Jews, and what they did. It was awful. But, it's just that the complete insanity that plays is just...
into impatience. Most of the German nobles were busy fighting amongst each other, but some of them quickly became obsessed with the promise of indulgence in return for military service. Count Emicho of Leiningen added his own ideas to the crusade by tattooing a cross on himself and proclaiming that he was the last emperor, the one who would unite East and West before going to Jerusalem and wiping out Judaism.
Oh my gosh.
His well-equipped and well-organized army unleashed a wave of violence, which began on May 3rd, 1096, at the newly settled city of Speyer by storming into the synagogue. The Bishop of Speyer, who had heard of the coming danger, did everything he could to protect the Jewish populace, and as a result of his actions, only 11 of them were killed. 15 days later, Emicho descended upon the city of Worms, where according to the Mainz Chronicle, they took a trampled corpse of theirs, which had been buried 30 days previously, and carried it through the city, saying, "Behold what the Jews have done to our comrade. They took a Gentile and boiled him in water. Then they poured the water into our wells in order to kill us."
Oh my gosh.
Many Jews, forewarned by the events in Speyer, had already sought the protection of the Bishop of Worms. They looked on from the sanctuary of his palace as those of their brethren that had chosen to remain at home were massacred. The Crusaders demanded that they convert, and those who did were spared, but the majority of them refused. Emiko laid siege to the bishop's palace, and once his soldiers broke in, they discovered that the Jews inside had decided to take their own lives rather than fall to their hands. Only 5 days later, the band was already in Mainz, where once again the local archbishop took a massive amount of money in return for sheltering his Jewish citizens. At first, the rest of the populace rallied around the Jews, but after a 2-day siege, some of them opened the gates, which the Crusaders saw as a miracle. "Behold, the gates have opened by themselves. All this the crucified has done for us, so that we might avenge his blood on the Jews."
Gosh, I'm telling you, they completely lost the point. I'm laughing at the absurdity. I'm not laughing at what happens. I actually think this is awful and disgusting what they do to the Jewish people. Like I said, I don't agree with anti-Semitism, and I know that it's been a thing that happened in European history. But like, you know, like, I'm laughing at the absurdity. I'm laughing at just... You can't write fiction like this. Like, honestly, just imagine putting this on, like, you could probably just make a show on this, and, like, oh my god. I'm surprised. You know, the more we watch history, the more I'm like, we don't really even need fantasy anymore. You just play history, make history films. It'll be as wild and as insane as any fiction an author can write, in my opinion. Like, no singular author could write something as wild as actual history. There's a saying, history is stranger than fiction. Put this on screens and just see people would be like, what the heck is going on? Like, insane, you know? So I'm laughing at, like, just the wildness, but I'm not laughing at this. I think this is awful, and, like, again, this is just disgusting.
1,014 of them died in a single day. Hearing of this, the citizens of Cologne took action and massacred their own Jewish population, destroying every Torah scroll they found along the way, while other cities like Regensburg were spared after mass forced conversions. The second group, under a monk named Volkmar, decided to pass through Bavaria and travel to Prague, inspiring another Jewish pogrom on June the 1st, while the Duke was away. Another group, with at least 15,000 followers, led by a man named Gottschall, also committed atrocities as they made their way along the Danube. It is important to note that the majority of these leaders...
Okay, Godfrey Boligno, for example, is reported to have extorted 500 silver pieces from the Jews of Mainz and Cologne in return for promises of protection that he failed to fulfill.
Would later join the Prince's Crusade, whose leaders also attacked members of the Jewish community. Meanwhile, Walter and around 10,000 Crusaders made it to the Hungarian border in May and met with King Koloman, who treated him well. But by the time they reached the Sava River, an accident occurred, involving 16 of Walter's men bartering with local weapons merchants before they were attacked and stripped of their clothes and valuables. The humiliated soldiers walked naked to the army camp, only to find that the governor of Belgrade refused to open his markets. In response, Walter plundered the countryside and rounded up as much cattle as he could in between skirmishes with the Hungarian and Byzantine border guards. At one point, 140 Crusaders were routed and sought refuge in a chapel, which the Byzantines burned down. Eventually, the group made it to Niš, where they were granted weapons and supplies by the governor, who ensured their safe passage to Constantinople, promising open markets along the way. Peter the Hermit's contingent, which had as many as 40,000 followers, was only a few days behind Walter's. Upon their entry to Hungary, King Koloman made them swear to keep the peace, but as the Crusaders approached the Sava River, they spotted the clothes of 16 Crusaders hanging from the battlements of Zemun.
Oh my gosh.
This sight came at the same time as a rumor began to circulate that a local Hungarian warlord and the governor of Belgrade were plotting against them. After camping in front of the city for 17 days, Peter ordered an attack.
My gosh. Poor Hungarians, man. The king is just like, hey guys, what's up? Go in, and then just all of this is happening. Yo.
His archers to target the watchmen, while the infantry assaulted the walls with scaling ladders. According to one source, 4,000 Hungarians
witnessing the brutal assault, the governor of Belgrade abandoned the city.
Were killed at the cost of just 100 crusaders, and whether the numbers were exaggerated or not, the city was taken and became their base for a week. By this time, Peter learned that the Hungarians were gathering an army, so he ordered his men to begin crossing the river with 150 ships and rafts made from timber stripped from the houses and bound with rope. While the people and supplies were being ferried, 7 boats filled with Pecheneg archers approached and opened fire. A makeshift Frankish navy grouped up and attempted to counterattack, destroying all the enemy vessels, but their cohesion was significantly damaged. As they arrived at Niš, a deal was struck, exchanging high-ranking hostages in return for access to the local markets. But it didn't take long for hostilities to resume. A group of soldiers were dissatisfied with another group of merchants and decided to set fire to several mills and houses just outside the city, as the Crusaders were already on the road. In response, the governor launched a raid on the rear, mostly made up of the elderly men, women, and children.
Ooh.
Cattle were stolen. Dozens were killed or captured before the rest of the column could even react. Peter could not let this go unpunished, so he turned his army around and attempted to negotiate. His followers, however, were uninterested in peace, and 2,000 young men attacked the city without any semblance of a plan. The garrison managed to hold out against the attack, repelling them with arrows and other projectile weapons, and once the Crusaders retreated, the troops sallied out. The disjointed and broken army was now in full flight.
That's the thing, though. Like I said, I know that princes joined his cause, and he technically did have soldiers, not just the children and whatnot. But he also is, a lot of his thing is just normal people, right? Not fully trained soldiers, and you see the difference when they're actually facing soldiers, of quality, cohesion, and just actually fighting an enemy that knows how to fight. You see the difference between his People's Crusade and why the Prince's Crusade needed soldiers, and warriors. Again, this is insane, man. Boy, I don't think I've laughed this hard ever. I can't think of another time I've laughed this hard.
And many drowned in the river. Men, women, and children fell prey to the Byzantines, who managed to capture most of their goods, including a wagon filled with gold and silver. The Crusaders scattered into the nearby forests, but miraculously, only a quarter of them were lost in the battle. However, that included a good portion of the fighting men, as well as most of their provisions. On July 12th, Peter reached Serdica and met with imperial emissaries, who ensured that there was no trouble for the remainder of the journey, and that the army was well supplied. A generous gesture which showed both the commitment and preparation of Alexios Komnenos. The next group to reach Hungary was that of Folkmar, but after a brawl broke out in the capital, the army quickly responded by killing and enslaving anyone who failed to escape. Then came Gottschalk's contingent, and this time the Hungarian king kept them at Moson for a prolonged period of time, and a Hungarian merchant was impaled after a failed bargain.
My
Battle
goodness.
lines were drawn, but neither side wanted to engage, so after a prolonged stare-down, the Hungarians proposed a truce. If indeed you surrender them to the king with all the money you have, you might soothe his anger and find grace in his eyes. But if you do otherwise, not one of you will stand before his face or go on living, since you have committed such contumacy and calumny in his kingdom. The
completely justified. Koloman has been suffering too for no reason, so I don't blame him for just being dumb. I hate all of you. You all suck in my opinion. For Hungary, man, like they were just vibing and in all this madness, you know?
Crusaders agreed, and as soon as they were disarmed, the Hungarians put them to the sword. Finally, Emico's army crossed into Hungary, but Koloman refused to even deal with them, so the Crusaders decided to lay siege to the capital and devastated the countryside. There were numerous skirmishes while bridges and catapults were built, and finally 2 breaches were opened on August 15, 1096. While the king was preparing to flee, the defenders organized a desperate last stand as the Franks poured in.
That is insane. They literally have besieged and they're trying to get the king. That's insane.
It's turned, and the knights were routed.
Most of their senior officers would later join the contingent of such as Hugh of Vermandios, while Emico returned home.
Those who were well equipped and mounted managed to escape, while the rest were vanquished. Back in Constantinople, Peter
Emico getting away without any like repercussions is insane to me. The guy was like the biggest menace there.
Finally met up with Walter's contingent and personally met with Alexios, who was instantly impressed by the charismatic hermit. The number of Crusaders...
You have to give it to Peter, man. His charisma, it's like a D&D game. I've compared this to like a D&D game like I did in the first part, of terms of just like, you know, the madness, but like, Peter is like, put all his stats in charisma, you know? It's just rolling high numbers.
Was significant, but there were little more than 500 knights and a few thousand footmen, as most of the fighters were lost along the way fighting Hungarians and Byzantines, so the emperor advised that they wait for reinforcements outside the city walls. This was seen as a grave insult to the thousands of people who had travelled all this way and were now prevented from seeing some of the most holy sites in Christendom, so naturally more looting occurred. According to Anna Komnena's Alexiad, the Christians behaved abominably. They sacked and burned palaces of the city and stole the lead from church roofs so that they could sell it back to the Greeks. Despite his lack of confidence, Alexios knew that his guests couldn't stay long, so they were ferried across to Anatolia on the 6th of August.
Alexios, essentially, I applaud him mainly because he has to deal with the insanity of these people and get them out of there as quickly as possible. Like, he needed to put up he needed to use such great diplomatic skill just to deal with the Western Europeans, man, you know?
Asiatic shore, they began attacking in all directions, usually Christians living under the Seljuks, pillaging houses and churches all the way to Nicomedia, which was deserted since its sack 15 years earlier, and was converted to their new base of operations. The Romans kept a steady supply of grain ships, selling provisions at a fair price to it, and the other base at Civetot. But months went by without much progress, and the coins were starting to run out. On October the 1st, Peter decided to go back to Constantinople in hopes of striking a new deal with Alexios, and in his absence, a rift formed between the Frankish knights on one side and the German and Italian knights on the other. As animosity grew, the latter group decided to leave Civetot and raid as far as Nicaea on their own. The once great Roman city was now the capital of the Sultanate of Rum, ruled by Kilij Arslan. The Nicaean garrison charged out, but was defeated by the knights, who despite their lack of leadership, had some of the best training and equipment money could buy.
Again, knights are known, like, yeah, I think I've heard of the training of knights. Like, they start when they're really young, like children, and basically are bred from childhood to be some of the strongest fighters of the world with their armor and their horsemanship and just their training. Like, they can get by a lot on just pure skill. Even when knights are on the losing side, I've said before, they can still inflict heavy casualties because they're just that skilled of warriors, you know?
After the Turks were repelled, they headed towards the nearby castle of Zerigodos, which they quickly captured, sparing only its Christian population. The castle had plenty of grain, meat and wine. but was a signal to the Turks that this was not a threat they could deal with easily. 3 days later, Kilij Arslan made his way towards it, defeating an ambush laid by the Italian contingent along the way. Siege lines were drawn, and the unyielding Christians were cut off from the rest of their allies. The only 2 sources of fresh water nearby were located outside the castle walls and guarded by the Seljuks. As the days dragged on, the Crusaders began to drink their own urine and sewage water.
Oh.
Some of them buried themselves in the sand in the hope of retaining moisture, or tried to suck water out of the dry earth. On the 8th day, the gate was set on fire, causing a wild panic. Some surrendered, while others jumped, sallied out, and were assaulted with arrows.
At Granger, we're for the ones.
Only a few Germans managed to survive. Back in the camp, Peter was still negotiating, while a Turkish spy told the Crusaders that Nicaea had fallen and that the Crusaders were dividing up the loot between themselves. Once again, the Christians were divided, with some advising to wait for their leader, while the rest wanted to act now. A decision was made that all the fighting men would deploy in 6 divisions and move towards Nicaea, while the women, children, and sick stayed in Civetot. Somewhere along the way, the truth was revealed, and excitement turned into panic, which only multiplied as Kilij Arslan's army ambushed them from the woods, just 3 miles away from the camp. No formations were drawn. Instead, each of the divisions rallied themselves and attacked the far more mobile enemy.
Just no discipline, no tactics, just really just a mob. Like, it's insane. Like, just watching it is funny to me.
The horse archers employed hit-and-run tactics before encircling 2 of the divisions, while another group of Turkish cavalry circled around to cut off their retreat. The remaining 4 divisions charged forward as the Seljuks fired at them in a classic feint retreat. Initially, the situation...
This feint retreat, man, it just keeps coming back. They love their feint retreat. I mean, it's had such great success this series, it's insane. Mad.
looked hopeful, as the mounted knights took down hundreds of their opponents, but then the Turks aimed at their horses, which led to a massacre. There were only a few survivors, which did not include Walter Sans-Avoir, who had 7 arrows sticking out of him. The remainder was chased down to Civetot. The camp followers lit bonfires, which were carried by the winds into the enemy, but the situation was hopeless. Tens of thousands who were inspired by Peter now ran for their lives. Many of them drowned or were killed, but most were captured. Those who refused to convert were taken captive and carted to Antioch.
Yeah, so I gotta end the video right here. Boy, I haven't laughed that hard in a while. I don't think I've ever laughed this hard in a series ever. I'm telling you, the first Crusade brings that out of me, man. That was... that was insane. Wait, we still have more. Wait, this was like, what, the first part? But now it's gonna be like... Oh, no, wait, no. No, we're moving on to the Princess Crusade next. Alright, guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye, everyone.